The dinner table looked warm and perfect, roast chicken steaming, mashed potatoes still glistening with butter, a salad bowl catching the soft light. Glasses clinked softly, forks scraped plates. It was the kind of scene you'd see in a holiday commercial. But I knew better. Beneath that cozy picture, there was tension so thick you could slice it with a knife. The smell of rosemary and garlic hung heavy in the air, mixing with the faint scent of my dad's aftershave and the waxy aroma from the candles. Mom insisted on lighting for special dinners. Steam curled lazily from the gravy boat, catching the glow of the overhead light. My chair felt colder than the rest, tucked slightly apart from the cluster at the center of the table. I sat at my usual spot, the far end of the table. From there, I could see everyone. My dad, silent as always, carving his chicken like it was the most important job in the world. My mom, smiling in that forced way that didn't quite reach her eyes. And my sister sitting dead center, like a queen presiding over her court. Every now and then she'd glance at me, eyes flicking with something sharp. Small talk floated around, but it felt off. Too careful, too clipped. Words were followed by awkward pauses. Even the laughter sounded rehearsed. My fork hovered over my plate more than it moved. I'd been in enough of these family dinners to know the quiet wasn't comfort, it was a warning. The only constant sound was the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen, the kind of background noise you don't notice until everything else goes silent. And then she did it. My sister put down her fork, leaned back in her chair, and said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're useless." The word hung in the air like smoke. It was so sudden, so deliberate, the room seemed to stop breathing. My dad froze mid-bite. My mom's hand twitched around her glass. My cousin coughed into his napkin. No one said a word. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, settling in my cheeks, but my face stayed calm. My eyes stayed on her. I'd heard that kind of thing from her before, sometimes in private, sometimes with an audience. But tonight it landed differently. Tonight it wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration. My mom gave a small, nervous laugh, trying to smooth things over. Now, she started, but my sister didn't even glance her way. Her eyes stayed on me, sharp, unblinking. Her lips curled in the slightest smirk, like she knew she'd hit her mark. Dad didn't step in. No one defended me. That stung more than her words. Because it wasn't just about being called useless, it was about realizing that in this room, my place at the table was conditional. I took in the scene, the plates half full, the flickering candles, the faces pretending not to watch, and I felt something shift. The familiar ache of humiliation was there, but it was joined by something hotter, sharper. It wasn't rage, not exactly. It was the undeniable urge to end this game she'd been playing for years. I set my fork down, slowly. My hands were steady, but my heart was pounding hard enough I could hear it in my ears. "Are you sure you want to say that to me right now?" I asked. My voice was calm, too calm. Her smirk deepened, like she thought I was bluffing. To her, I was still the sibling she could mock in front of everyone, the one who'd just swallow the insult and keep eating. She had no idea what I was holding back. For years, I'd kept a part of my life hidden, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want to deal with the questions, the favors, the fake smiles. They'd all assumed my simple clothes and quiet life meant I had nothing, that I was nothing. And I'd let them believe it. But that ended tonight. I leaned back in my chair, meeting her stare with one of my own. My next words would flip this entire dinner upside down, and once they were out, there'd be no going back. The roast chicken would grow cold, the mashed potatoes would sit untouched, and my sister's smirk, it wouldn't survive the next 30 seconds. Families like to pretend they're built on love, but mine was built on appearances. On paper, we looked perfect holiday cards, with matching sweaters, smiling at barbecues, all the cliches. In reality, there was a silent hierarchy, and I'd always been at the bottom. My sister, Rachel, was the golden one, the one who got straight A's, the one who made captain of the cheer squad, the one whose wedding my parents treated like a royal event. She had the job title everyone bragged about at family reunions and the house in the suburbs with the picture-perfect front lawn. Me, I was the quiet one, the one who didn't show up to every gathering, the one who drove the same beat-up car for years. I'd started my own business in my 20s, but because it wasn't flashy and didn't fit into their idea of success, they never took it seriously. I remember being 16, helping in the kitchen before Thanksgiving dinner. Rachel breezed in, wearing a new dress, and our aunt immediately said, "You're going to be something big someday." She turned to me and added, "And you, well, you're sweet." It was meant to be kind, but it was a label one I could never shake. That sweet label morphed into simple, then unsuccessful, and eventually useless in Rachel's vocabulary. Over the years, she'd make little digs during conversations. Not everyone's cut out for the big leagues. It's okay, you probably wouldn't understand. Sometimes she'd say them in front of relatives, just to watch me swallow my pride. My parents never stopped her. Dad hated confrontation, and Mom was too busy keeping the peace. I learned early on to just let the comments slide. It was easier that way. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But I was never as harmless as they thought. While Rachel was chasing promotions, I was quietly building something of my own. My small business, the one nobody asked about, started as a side hustle in my cramped apartment. I worked nights, weekends, holidays. I reinvested every dollar I made. There were months I lived on instant noodles just to keep the cash flow steady. I didn't post about it. I didn't brag. I didn't need the validation. And the less they knew, the freer I felt. The funny thing is, Rachel's arrogance grew with my silence. The less I said, the more she assumed she knew everything about me. She thought I'd plateaued in my 20s and stayed there. She thought I was surviving, not thriving. And in her mind, that gave her the right to treat me like an afterthought. It wasn't just her words that cut, it was the way the rest of the family played along. Like the time I brought dessert to a 4th of July cookout. Rachel laughed and said, "Oh, store-bought? Figures." Everyone chuckled. No one noticed I'd spent the night before baking that pie from scratch. Or maybe they did notice, and didn't care. The family dynamic everyone pretended was normal was really just a cycle. Rachel played the star, I played the shadow, and everyone else pretended not to see the cracks. Except the cracks were getting bigger. It started with little signs my mom asking if I could help Rachel out with her mortgage for a few months, just until she gets her bonus. Or my dad hinting that maybe I could find something more stable, since times are tough. I said no, politely but firmly, every time. And every time I did, Rachel's patience wore thinner. She didn't like no, she wasn't used to it. And each refusal made me more certain of one thing. Rachel had no idea who she was dealing with anymore. The version of me she thought she could step on was long gone. Which brings us back to that night at the dinner table. The way she looked at me before she said it, "You're useless," wasn't just about embarrassing me. It was a reminder of my place in this family. In her mind, she was untouchable. In her mind, she was still the one with all the cards. What she didn't know was that I'd been holding my own hand, and it was a winning one. The word useless was still hanging in the air when I set my fork down. It didn't clang against the plate, it landed softly, but the sound still drew eyes. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. Not from embarrassment this time, but from focus. The kind of steady, cold focus you get right before you take a shot you know you'll make. Rachel leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. Her smirk said, "Go ahead, try me." She'd done this before, cornered me, dared me to speak up, knowing I'd back down. Not tonight. The candles flickered in the draft from the AC. My mom glanced between us, chewing her lip like she was watching a scene she'd seen too many times but couldn't stop. Dad kept his eyes on his plate, carving another slice of chicken he wasn't going to eat. My cousin shifted in his chair, gripping his napkin so tight it looked like he might tear it. "You're sure you want to say that to me right now?" I repeated, my voice calm, almost too calm. Rachel shrugged. "Why not? You've never proved me wrong." Something in me clicked. It wasn't anger anymore, it was a quiet certainty. The kind that comes from knowing you've been underestimated for too long. A memory flashed in my mind. Me at 22, overhearing her tell a family friend that I was too soft to survive out there. The same condescending tone, the same self-satisfied smile. I'd swallowed it then. I wouldn't now. I sat back in my chair, resting one arm casually along the backrest. My other hand reached for my glass of water. I took a slow sip, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. No one moved. No one spoke. When I put the glass down, I locked eyes with her. "Do you know what I did last Thursday?" She blinked, caught off guard by the question. "No, and I don't really care." "You should," I said, "because last Thursday I signed the final paperwork on my 10th property." A ripple went through the table. My cousin's fork slipped from his fingers. My mom's eyes widened, her hand frozen halfway to the bread basket. Dad stopped carving mid-slice. Rachel laughed, but it was too sharp. "What are you talking about? You rent an apartment." "Owned," I cut in. and it's one of the smallest in my portfolio. The others? Commercial, residential, all paid off. The smirk wavered, just a little. You're lying, she said, but her voice had lost that confident edge. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. You think I've been drifting through life, that I've been coasting, but while you were playing Queen Bee at work, I was building something real, quietly, without you knowing. Because I knew the second I told you it would become your success story. Something you'd spin to make yourself look better. The air in the room felt different now, heavier, tighter. Even the faint hum of the fridge seemed to fade. Rachel's eyes darted to our parents, looking for backup. None came. My mom's lips were pressed into a thin line. My dad, he was actually looking at me now, really looking. My cousin leaned forward like he didn't want to miss a single word. I didn't stop. You've called me useless for years, but in the past 5 years alone, I've made more than you and your husband combined, and I didn't have to beg anyone for a promotion to do it. Her jaw tightened. So what, you're rich now? That's supposed to make you better than me? No, I said. It just means I'm not who you think I am, and maybe you're not as untouchable as you think. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't awkward, it was electric. Everyone knew we'd crossed a line there was no going back from. Rachel tried to speak, but nothing came out. She reached for her wine glass instead, her hand trembling just enough for me to notice. Somewhere deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because the real shock wasn't just that I had more than they thought it was what I planned to do with it, and they'd find out soon enough. For a few long seconds, no one moved. The only sound in the room was the faint hiss of the candles and the slow drip of gravy from the serving spoon back into the boat. Rachel's smirk was gone. In its place was a look I'd only seen once before the night she lost her big promotion and pretended it didn't matter. Her mouth was tight, her eyes narrowed, but there was something else there now. Uncertainty. My mom was the first to break the silence. She set her glass down carefully, as if afraid even that noise might tip things further. You own 10 properties? She asked, her voice thin. Yes, I said simply. I didn't elaborate. I didn't rush to explain. The weight of those words was heavy enough without me pushing them. Dad leaned back in his chair, his fork abandoned on the plate. He studied me the way you might study a stranger who looks familiar but not quite right. Why didn't you tell us? Would it have mattered? I asked. The only thing anyone here's cared about is the version of me you've decided to believe. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He didn't answer. Rachel finally found her voice. So what? You've been hiding money while the rest of us. Stop, I cut in. This isn't about money. It's about the fact that you've made my worth in this family conditional on what you think I have, instead of who I am. Her eyes flashed, but the usual quick retort didn't come. She glanced around the table, expecting someone to jump in, but no one did. I could feel the power shift subtle, but undeniable. For years, she'd been the center of the table, the voice everyone followed. Now, every gaze was bouncing between her and me. And it wasn't just curiosity, it was evaluation. The kind you feel when people realize they might have underestimated you all along. My cousin broke the tension with a low whistle. Damn, he muttered under his breath, earning a sharp glare from Rachel. Mom's fingers were fidgeting with her napkin, twisting it into a tight rope. She looked like she wanted to say something conciliatory, but the words never made it past her lips. Dad was still watching me, and for once there was no trace of dismissal in his expression, just a slow, reluctant respect creeping in. Rachel's voice came out sharper than before. If you're trying to humiliate me, I'm not, I said. I'm telling you the truth, something I should have done years ago. You can take it however you want. The truth was, I could have stopped there. I could have let the shock settle, finished my meal, and gone home with the satisfaction of knowing the playing field had changed. But I didn't. Because part of me wanted her to feel what I'd felt, that slow-burning realization that the version of reality you've clung to is gone forever. You know that building downtown? The one you said was too good for someone like me when we passed it last Christmas? I asked. She hesitated. Yeah, what about it? I bought it last month. The impact was immediate. Her eyes went wide, then narrowed again, like she was trying to decide whether to call me a liar or demand proof. You're making this up, she said finally, but her voice wavered. I'm not, I replied. And the next time you drive past it, remember you don't know everything about me. The tension at the table was a living thing now, pulsing between us. Every second felt stretched thin, like it could snap at any moment. My mom cleared her throat. Well, I suppose congratulations are in order. The words sounded strange coming from her, like she wasn't quite sure how to use them on me. Rachel didn't congratulate me. She didn't even look at me. She just reached for her wine, drained what was left, and stared into the empty glass as if the bottom might hold an answer. In that silence, a strange calm settled over me. I'd spent years absorbing the weight of their low expectations. Now, that weight was shifting, pressing onto Rachel instead. And she hated it. But there was something in her eyes when she finally looked up a flicker that told me this wasn't over. She wasn't the type to surrender quietly. And if I knew Rachel, her next move wouldn't be subtle. Rachel didn't stay quiet for long. She never did. The stem of her wineglass made a sharp clink as she set it down. "You think this makes you better than me?" she asked, her voice low, almost steady, the kind of tone she used when she wanted to sound in control. I met her gaze. "I think it makes me not useless, which is all I needed to prove tonight." Her mouth curved into a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Congratulations on buying a few buildings. Really impressive, if you're into that sort of thing. But money doesn't change who you are." "Maybe not," I said. "But it's amazing how fast people's attitudes change when they realize you have it." Her eyes flickered just for a second toward our parents, checking if they'd side with her. Dad stayed silent, his hands folded on the table. Mom looked like she was silently begging us both to stop, but she didn't say it out loud. Rachel leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You've been sitting here acting like you've outsmarted me. But hiding this for years? That's not power, that's fear. You were afraid to tell anyone because deep down you knew you'd still be the same insecure kid you've always been." The words were sharp, meant to cut. A few years ago they would have. Now, they just rolled off. "If I'm still that kid, then you're still the girl who needs to tear other people down to feel tall," I said evenly. That landed. I could see it in the quick, tight twitch at the corner of her mouth. The table went still again. My cousin looked from me to her like he was watching a tennis match. Mom pressed her napkin to her lips, as if that could hide the way she was biting them. Dad's eyes stayed fixed on me, but I could sense his mind shifting gears, reevaluating every assumption he'd had about me. Rachel's voice sharpened. "You've been sitting here enjoying your little moment, but you forget something: you don't have this family's respect. You never will." I let out a quiet laugh, not mocking, but certain. Maybe, or maybe tonight is the first time they're seeing me for who I am, instead of who you've told them I am. Dad finally spoke. "That's enough," he said, his tone more warning than command. But it was too late. The energy between us had shifted. The control she'd always had in this room was slipping, and we both knew it. Her posture changed, shoulders squared, chin lifted, but there was a stiffness in her movements that gave her away. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles whitening as though holding on to the last bit of control she could. She tried a new tactic. "Fine. You've got money. Why don't you prove how generous you are and help out a little? Mom's been talking about remodeling the kitchen." There it was, the pivot, the moment she tried to turn my reveal into leverage. I shook my head. No. Her eyes widened slightly, as if the refusal was unthinkable. "Excuse me?" "No," I repeated. "I'm not here to be your ATM. I'm not here to buy my way into respect." "You're unbelievable," she spat. "You sit there acting like you're above all this, but you're just selfish." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "If saying no to people who've disrespected me for years makes me selfish, then fine. I'll wear that." The silence that followed was heavier than before, but this time, I owned it. I could feel the balance tipping further, the unspoken acknowledgement around the table that the rules had changed. For the first time, Rachel didn't look like the one in charge. She looked cornered. Her eyes darted toward me, then away, calculating. And I knew that look, the one she got before she pulled something big, she wasn't done, not by a long shot. And whatever she was planning next, she'd make sure it hit where she thought I was weakest. Rachel leaned back in her chair, and for a moment, I thought she might retreat, that maybe the weight of the night had finally sunk in. But then I saw the subtle shift in her expression. The smirk didn't return, but her eyes sharpened, calculating. She straightened, pushing her empty wine glass away like it was dead weight. "You know what's funny?" she began, her voice smoother now, almost casual. "All this time you've been hiding your little empire, and yet you still show up to family dinners alone." I knew where she was going, but I let her continue. 10 properties and not one person to share them with," she said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "It's almost sad, really. Money can't keep you warm at night. Money doesn't hold your hand when things get bad." The words slid across the table like ice, cold and deliberate. She was probing, looking for a crack. And even though I'd expected it, I still felt that old familiar pressure in my chest, the same one I'd felt as a teenager when she'd mock my quietness in front of friends. That sting was still there, buried under years of self-control. Mom flinched, her eyes darting to me, as if silently asking me not to take the bait. Dad stayed stone-faced, though I noticed his gaze shift toward Rachel, maybe sensing she was going too far. My cousin dropped his fork, its clatter cutting through the silence before he froze, clearly torn between discomfort and fascination. Rachel's voice dropped just a touch. Tell me, when was the last time someone actually wanted you around? Not for your money, just for you. I smiled slightly, not out of amusement, but because I recognized the move. This was Rachel at her most dangerous. Not yelling, not mocking, but pressing on a perceived wound, waiting for me to flinch. You really think you're the first person to figure out I'm not married? I said, keeping my tone calm. Newsflash, Rachel, I don't measure my worth by whether I have someone sitting next to me at this table. Her lips tightened, but she didn't stop. No, of course you don't. That would require you to admit you failed at something that actually matters. I leaned back, letting her words hang in the air. Around the table, I caught the subtle shifts, my cousin's eyes flicking between us like he was afraid to blink, Mom's hand frozen over her fork, Dad's jaw tightening. I could hear Rachel's breathing slower than usual, deliberate, and realized she was pacing herself like a chess player, saving her best move. Then I struck. If we're measuring failures, maybe we should count yours too. How's that second mortgage treating you? Or the fact that you've refinanced 3 times in the last 2 years? The flicker in her eyes told me I'd hit home. She scoffed, but the edge in her voice betrayed her. You've been snooping into my finances? I shrugged. Public records are a beautiful thing. And don't act shocked you've been keeping tabs on me for years. The difference is, I didn't underestimate you. You underestimated me. The table fell silent again. Even the hum of the fridge seemed to have dimmed, like the whole room was holding its breath. Rachel's nails tapped against the table, a steady, impatient rhythm. You think you've won tonight, she said, finally, but you haven't, because when this family needs help, and trust me, they will, they'll still come to me first, not you. You've been invisible too long to change that in one night. Her words were meant to reclaim ground, but I could hear the thinness in them, the desperation. She was talking more to convince herself than anyone else. Maybe, I said, my tone light, or maybe tonight is the start of something different, and you're terrified of that. For the first time all evening, she looked away first. It wasn't a victory cheer moment, it was quieter than that, heavier, because I knew she was already thinking about her next move. And knowing Rachel, it wouldn't be another verbal jab. She'd come at me from a different angle, and if she hit, she'd aim for maximum damage. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I could almost hear the click of a chess clock. My turn was over. Hers was about to begin. Dinner didn't last much longer after that. The roast chicken went cold, the mashed potatoes hardened in their bowl, and whatever conversation anyone tried to start fizzled out in seconds. The air in the room was thick, like we were all sitting in the aftermath of a storm, waiting to see if it would start up again. Rachel didn't say another word to me. She kept her eyes on her plate, cutting her chicken into pieces too small to eat, pushing them around like she was moving pawns across a chessboard she'd already lost. But the stiffness in her shoulders told me she wasn't done just retreating to regroup. Mom tried a few times to break the tension. So, how's work been? She asked my cousin. We should all get together again soon, she said at one point, her voice overly bright. But the words floated in the air, unwanted, and fell flat. Dad was the only one who seemed to be studying me more than her now. Not in the skeptical way he used to, but in that cautious, almost respectful way people look at someone they realize they've underestimated. I didn't know if it meant he was proud, but I knew it meant he'd remember tonight. When dinner finally ended, chairs scraped back slowly, like no one wanted to be the first to move. Mom hugged me at the door. It was quick, but she held on a beat longer than usual. Take care of yourself, she murmured. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Rachel walked past me without a glance, her perfume lingering for a moment before it disappeared into the night air. I watched her go, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel smaller when she was in the room. Out in the driveway, the cool night air hit my face, sharp and cleansing. My footsteps crunched on the gravel as I walked to my car. The porch light cast a faint glow over the yard, and for a brief second, I could see our reflections in the dining room window, the family still inside, clustered in quiet conversation. I knew I'd shifted the balance in there, even if they'd never say it out loud. Driving home, the streetlights cast long shadows across the dashboard. The hum of the tires on asphalt was steady, almost meditative. My phone buzzed once, a message from a friend asking how dinner went. I typed back, "Interesting." That was the only word that fit. Red lights gave me time to think. I remembered being 16, walking away from another family dinner with my head down, replaying every insult, wishing I'd had the courage to speak up. Tonight, the walk to my car felt nothing like that. My head was up, my chest was lighter, and even though I knew Rachel would come back swinging, I felt ready for her this time. I thought about what she'd said, about money not keeping you warm at night. She wasn't wrong, but she also wasn't right. Money hadn't given me love, but it had given me choices, the choice to stay, the choice to walk away, the choice to speak when silence used to feel safer. And maybe that was the real shift tonight. Not that I'd revealed my success, but that I'd stopped letting her define my worth. In the weeks that followed, the change was subtle but real. Calls from my parents came a little more often. My cousin reached out about a potential business idea. Rachel? She stayed quiet on the surface. But I could feel her watching, waiting for her moment. I knew it would come eventually. But the difference now? I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready. Because here's the thing I've learned, and maybe the thing you need to hear too. People will put you in whatever box makes them comfortable. Sometimes that box is useless, sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's not one of us. And they'll keep you there as long as you let them. The only way out is to stop playing their game. To live in a way that's true to you, whether they're watching or not. Think about it in sports. The underdog team doesn't win by mimicking the favorite's playbook. They win by making their own moves, by playing their game until the scoreboard changes. Life works the same way. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told you're not enough, remember this: you don't need their permission to prove them wrong. You just need the patience to wait for your moment and the courage to take it. And when you do, trust me, they'll never forget it. If tonight's story made you think about your own worth, about the moments you've stayed silent when you should have spoken, then stick around. I've got more stories to tell. Stories about knowing your value, standing your ground, and turning quiet strength into something that can't be ignored. Hit that subscribe button, and we'll keep walking this road together.